All right, good morning, everyone. You're here for the professional webinar, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. And we'll get started in just a minute. We've just opened up the room and people are logging on. And so we'll get started shortly. Y'all are well trained. You already telling us where you're from. Thank you so much for doing that. Also, instead of just telling us where you're from, I would love it if you would go ahead and put in the chat what your favorite tree is, kind of going along with the topic of today, and where you're from would be awesome. I see we've got South Florida coming in. That's great. Got West Florida, Tampa area. Titusville's in. Pasco. Fantastic. Polk. Red Buckeye. Nice choice. Pin Oak. Good. Gumbo Limbo. Oh, beautiful. Black Gum. Nice. River Birch. Hard to beat a live oak. And how about Southern Magnolia? Oh, goodness. So many trees we have in Florida. Ironwood. Look at that. Royal Poinciana. Huh? Very nice. Banyan. And that's from Tallahassee. That's interesting. You don't have any at your house, I don't think. Rainbow eucalyptus. Huh, very nice. Very so pretty. Geiger tree. Huh, nice. Cannonball. Dogwoods. We just don't have many left in Florida, unfortunately. Chickasaw plum. Nice. Good choice. All right. Well, with that, keep letting us know what your favorite trees are and where you're from. And we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. I am Tom Wickman. I'm the Assistant Director of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and I'd like to welcome you to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. This series happens every month on the second Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Um, Today's webinar is Wrangling Roots, Management and Considerations Regarding Tree Roots in the Urban Setting with Dr. Jamie Daugherty. Your microphones have been muted. We'll be closing the chat feature during the presentation. Please put any questions that you have during the presentation in the Q&A box, and we'll take those at the end of the presentation. This webinar is approved for one FFLCP, LIAF, FDAX, LF, LCLM, LLO, and CLO, DBPR, LA, and CAM, ISA, and one FNGLA CEU. There's a $15 administration fee to receive a certificate for continuing education. I'll put the link to that in the chat box to make payment for the certificate if you've not already done so. We'll submit the CEUs to the licensing agency on Friday, so make sure if you want the CEU to make the payment by the end of the day. This is a part of a monthly webinar series held on the second Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Our next regularly scheduled webinar will be August 11th with Dr. Micah McMillan talking about palm tree management and a palm tree management update. Also, you'll see a survey invitation pop up. Please take a moment to fill that survey out. It really helps us determine what educational programs to offer for next year. It's hard to believe we're in July already, but we're already thinking about planning for 2027. And so please let us know what those topics that you find most interesting and most useful in your career. Um, and now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Jamie Doherty is the Florida Friendly Landscaping and Urban Forestry Extension Agent for UF IFAS Extension in Sumter County. She holds a PhD in environmental horticulture and previously served in Lake County, specializing in community forestry, urban forestry, and plant evolution. Dr. Daugherty has a well-read blog showcasing a mix of practical advice, plant profiles, and environmental education tailored to Central Florida landscapes. Her posts cover everything from tree care and pruning techniques to plant profiles for native and Florida-friendly species. She also explores seasonal topics such as prepping trees for hurricanes or managing freeze damage, and highlights the ecological value of trees through engaging stories and visuals. Dr. Daugherty also works collaboratively on an educational video segment, educating professionals and residents about various tree topics. With that, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dr. Jamie Daugherty to talk about wrangling roots. Jamie, take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tom. It was so nice. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I do want to give you just a tiny bit more about my background because I know I have industry people on here. I actually started my profession in New York City with the Department of Parks and Recreation doing street tree planting. So I have been in the urban forestry world since about 2008 in one way or another. So I've got lots of stories about tree and sidewalk issues. So one thing I want us all to remember as we go through this, and hopefully most of you understand this, a lot of times we think about trees and infrastructure as competing, when realistically trees are infrastructures in our cities. They provide us a number of benefits, both ecologically and economically, and we wouldn't be planting them if there wasn't a reason for it. So we want to make sure that we are utilizing them and managing them in a way that protects the tree infrastructure as they grow so we can get the most out of them while still, keeping the other infrastructure safe. So key points that we will be going over today is I'm just going to kind of go over understanding a little bit about how roots work, and then we're going to be talking about preventing root conflicts and then remediating those conflicts. So when I'm talking about preventing, I'm talking about considerations at the early stages when we're planting. And then remediation is we have trees, we don't want to get rid of them, but there's problems between the tree infrastructure and the concrete infrastructure to deal with. So talking about roots, we have to first start with the root flare, which is what I think is the most important part of a tree to identify, especially when we're planting, to make sure it's at the right level. The root flare can also be called the crown or the root collar, but this is really the critical location where the trunk transitions into roots. And this is something that needs to be visible at planting so that we know the roots are where they need to be, so that they're getting the moisture they need, they're getting the gas exchange that they need, and that tree is able to make itself stable. If you think about it, when you have something that's very tall, there's usually like a tall, slender object. There's some sort of taper at the bottom to help keep it in place. So even if you think about a telephone pole, there's something at the base holding it in place, right? We're not just sticking sticks in the ground and hoping they stand up. There's some sort of support. And the root flare is that support that helps with that tapering of every tree. Now, this presentation, I'm talking about trees. I'm not talking about palms. I have an entire presentation about palms aren't trees and why that's important. That could be something some other time. Or Micah can talk to you about it next week or next month. All right, so the root flare can destroy infrastructure if the tree is not planted correctly and there's not enough room. So one of the things when we're planting, we have to think about how big is the canopy going to get, how big of a space do the roots need, but also how wide is that trunk going to get specifically at the root flare, because that is going to be the largest part of the tree as it grows. So thinking about the different types of roots, the lateral roots are the topmost, largest roots, and they're really there for support, anchor, and storage of nutrients. So when you have the root flare, so we have the root flare here, you should see my laser. We have our root flare, and we can see all of these lateral structural roots coming off. Those are going to be your biggest, your thickest, and your most important for stability. Okay. A lot of these roots, and they're going to be your lateral roots a bit as well, they're all really within that same area as most of your turf roots, which is a little bit shocking for people. Tree roots don't go down as deep as some people visualize. I know growing up, and I'm sure you all have seen it too, where they'll depict a tree and the tree roots, like that tree of life, where it's a mirror image. The roots are absolutely not a mirror image. The roots are more of a root plate where they're within the top 3 feet of the soil for the most part. And a lot of times you find the fibrous roots in the top 18 inches. And what that can mean is if you have an issue with the roots or an issue with the soil during a storm, that entire root plate can come up. And this is where you can see the tree roots aren't that deep. So a lot of times I'll have people call and complain about a shallow rooted tree. And sometimes you can get them if it's, like some sort of hard pan or clay layer underneath where it's incredibly shallow, where you're only talking a couple of inches. But again, most roots are only in the top 3 feet of soil, which some consider to be shallow. Some might look at this and say this was a shallow root system, and it really wasn't. It just flooded and there wasn't anything left for the roots to hold on to with the really wet soil, and there was wind. So this particular tree fell over. In cases like this, if you have the money and the time, you can actually kind of write it up, stake it, and it's very possible this tree will be just fine as those roots just kind of reestablish themselves. So then we have our fibrous roots. These are the ones that are absorbing the water, the nutrients, and doing gas exchange at the surface. These are the ones that will kind of be competing with turf and also any other plants that you put in, say, a street tree bed. So this can be something to take into consideration when you're designing urban spaces. So if you're doing something like a sidewalk strip or some sort of planting bed or planting island in a parking lot, if you're wanting the tree to be successful, you may not want to put other plants in there because the soil volume is limited and any other plant you put in is going to be competing with the tree. And then a lot of times the smaller herbaceous plants are better at absorbing that water compared to the tree. And those trees do need a lot of water to become established. So let's think about that space that we need for the roots, considering those fibrous roots. So those fine roots can be found really well outside of the tree canopy. So let's think about a tree in a natural area where there's plenty of room, not in a tree bed or any kind of a tree island. So those trees can go out at least 5 to 10 feet past the canopy, if not even further. So when you're looking at a tree, so you're looking down at an image of a tree. So that center dot right here, that's the middle of the tree. This dotted line is the drip line. And then this is showing kind of that root spread from the drip line. And we're looking at 2 to 3 times the drip line minimum for those roots to spread out. And if that's a little hard to visualize, just picture the tree, picture it laying down, and know that the roots go out significantly farther than that. And those are the fibrous roots. They tend to be smaller. They tend to not get into things so much as long as there's not an existing issue. Right now, something to mention with that is the fibrous roots are the ones that can kind of get the tree into trouble. So fibrous roots are very small, some as thin as a strand of your hair. And if you think about it, the strand of your hair isn't going to be breaking through concrete. It's not breaking into water pipes. It's not doing anything unless there's a crack with moisture in it. And then that little hair, or little root hair, is small enough to get in, and then it grows, and then it can exacerbate a problem. But tree roots aren't technically the cause of the problem. They just indicate that there was a problem, and they can make it worse if they get in there. All right, so going back to roots, we're going to get into our sinker roots. And these just grow down from lateral roots. So the big, thick roots, they go down, and they're really helping with, again, storage and then just holding that tree in place. And then we have the taproot. Now, not all trees retain the taproot significantly for their whole life. When we're thinking about things like our longleaf pine, they have massive taproots that can be as wide as the trunk, but that's not normal for most of the trees that we interact with. Now, well-drained soils are needed for taproots to get as big as they're going to get. If you have compacted soil, a hard pan, clay layers, or anything like that, that can deflect and deter the taproot from getting very deep. Now, in well-drained soils, this is kind of showing the main lateral. So this is one of those topmost roots near the root flare. And then we have down here some oblique roots. They're just kind of growing sort of lateral, but not considered the main lateral branches. And then there's a tape measure here measuring the taproot that goes down. And the taproot's only going down about 32 inches. So in most cases, again, you're within the top approximately 3 feet of soil for the majority of your roots, including where those taproots end. Okay. Now, there are other limitations to root growth. Like I mentioned already, soil compaction, we need well-drained, loose soils for roots to grow. If the soil is heavily compacted, the roots aren't able to get through it. So again, if the soil is compacted and the roots can't get through it, a solid wall, the roots can't get through either. Now, I will say when we're talking about infrastructure where, let's say, a road or a sidewalk, and it's heavily compacted underneath so the roots can't get through it, and then you have the concrete or asphalt on top, which the roots can't get through directly, but you have that little layer in between that collects moisture and gases, right? So you'll get oxygen in there too, that those root hairs, when they're young, right, the fibrous roots are able to get in there to collect all of that, and then they're happy, so they grow, and that's what will cause that conflict there. So again, available oxygen, moisture is necessary. Also soil volume. If there isn't a large enough soil volume, the tree's not going to do well. Now, within this is one of the reasons why we tell people when you're planting a tree to backfill with the same soil that's on site when possible. Especially if you're in a yard, it can be different if you're dealing with things in an urban setting because your soil might not be plantable underneath. You might have to backfill with something different. But if you backfill in, say, a yard with some really highly organic material, and then it's sand on the outside that's low in organic matter, low in nutrients, those roots could do something like you see in this picture where they come out and they don't grow into the other soil. This can also happen if you have maybe a clay or harder soil outside of your tree bed and you don't try to loosen up the walls of that tree bed before you plant, right? You don't want solid, tight walls because you want those roots to be able to get through. Otherwise, it's basically like putting the tree in a pot where they'll just start to circle around and they won't have a lot going out to other locations. Physical barriers is another limitation. Like I said, most of the time, physical barriers, tree roots aren't going to be able to they're not getting through unless there's a crack with some reason for them to go through. And otherwise, they would deflect. So they go left, right, or down. Generally, they aren't going up. Okay. And then I mentioned organic matter, so that available organic matter is also going to limit those roots as well. All right, so we're going to move into preventing root conflicts. Now, I wanted to show you this. So I just got back from a conference in Denver, Colorado, and I was outside of the Denver Botanical Garden, which you can see right here. And they had these absolutely massive tree beds with these gorgeous wildflowers and native plants planted in them. And I mentioned earlier that when you have tree beds with limited soil volume, you don't really want to do competing plants. This is an example of a location with an amazing amount of soil volume where this works. Okay. So to prevent our root conflicts, we want to start with the right tree in the right place. And when we're thinking about this, it's location, but also diversity, grouping of our tree species. And one thing to consider is the general 30-20-10 rule. So 30-20-10 is about species diversity within our urban landscapes. And a lot of times we have the same 5-ish trees and palms that we use in urban settings in Florida. And that really sets us up for issues, say, if we get the emerald ash borer coming in, or if we got some kind of oak wilt coming in, or Asian longhorn beetle comes in, or something that comes in that specializes on, let's say, our live oaks, we're losing most of our urban canopy at that point. So with the 30-20-10 rule, it's no more than 10 from one species, no more than 10% of your inventory should be from one species, no more than 20 from one genus, and no more than 30% from one plant family to help keep it mixed up. Now, think about it. How many of you can say that your location is anywhere close to following that? Probably nobody. If anybody is, I would love to hear about it. It's not super common, but it is a goal to work through. So when we're thinking right tree, right place, there's things that we always want to consider, which again is, do we have enough room for the canopy? Do we have enough room for the roots? And do we have enough space for that root flare in that system as well? Generally speaking, if you don't have enough room for the roots, you don't really have enough room for the root flare. So this image is a tree that we were planting when I was working in Lake County. It is a bald cypress. I did not get to pick the tree species, but we're planting it in the largest bed that we had in the island around this particular parking lot. We did plant it correctly with, two times the opening for the plant. We staked it afterwards because it ended up being in a wind tunnel. Um, but this a relatively large space, and we expect that there's plenty of room for this tree to actually grow to its full size. Now, I mentioned grouping as well. There is research out there done by several different researchers within the University of Florida. I believe this one was led by Dr. Andrew Kozer, where they did look at the success of trees in groups managing through wind events. So, wind events generally in Florida, we think of them as hurricanes, but we can get pretty windy in some of our major storms that we have that aren't named hurricanes. And there is something to be said for grouping trees a little closer together. They help kind of like the same as in a forest, where they're helping to deflect the wind and protect each other. Now, if you are grouping, obviously you need to make sure you have plenty of room for all of the canopies to grow and for all of those roots to grow as well. So in this picture, these tree roots are going to take over this entire area, and they're going to get to be nice large trees. And I see this power line back here, but don't worry, that power line is far enough away that these trees aren't going to have a conflict with those. So again, less conflict is going to happen when you design the right place to fit the tree you want, or you choose the right tree for the site conditions. So usually when we say right tree, right place, it's looking at the site and picking what fits best. Sometimes there's not an existing location and you're doing a plan, and you're going to end up designing what you need. So when you're designing what you need to take into consideration how those roots grow, what kind of infrastructure needs to be in place underneath the ground as well. Okay. So plant your trees in open spaces when they're available. If it's not possible, you want to make sure you're directing roots towards open soil. So let's say you have a tree, you have a planting strip, right? And then you have a sidewalk, and then you have a yard. Well, if you plant a tree in the planting strip and that planting strip isn't anywhere near big enough, those roots are going to be doing everything they can to get to the yard. So you're just asking for sidewalk issues later on. So something to do in that case is, instead of planting in the planting strip, plant it in the yard, because then those roots aren't going to be fighting the concrete to get over to the planting strip so much, because the yard's going to be providing more of the resources that it needs. Okay. If there's not an open spot available, you want to design something that's going to have the appropriate amount of root space. I don't love it when I see urban trees in what is equivocally a giant constructed pot. But if you can do that with enough space, that can work for a certain amount of time. Now, something else to consider when we're dealing with our urban trees, most of these trees are not going to reach the end of their natural life stage that they would in the wild. So they won't get as old. And you do need to consider, how long is this tree going to survive in this location before it's going to need removed and replaced with another tree, just because it is infrastructure, right? Sidewalks aren't made to last forever. They're made to last, what is it, like 20 years, depending on the material. So as part of planning, you need to plan on, the maintenance and replacement of trees as infrastructure as well. So poor soil structure, things to consider, again, that compacted soil. So compaction happens with a lot of reasons, and we have sand, which really does move around quite a lot. But when we're backfilling, sometimes when we have more organic matter, it compacts even worse. But compaction basically is when the soil vibrates, whether it's from cars driving by or people walking by, dogs walking on the tree bed, whatever. It's pushing the soil particles together and squeezing out any of the airspace. And that airspace is where gas exchange happens. And it's also where water is able to accumulate for the plant to take up. Normally in urban settings, that compaction is only in the top couple of inches. So you can take a cultivator and loosen it up and then get water back into it. But otherwise, that top layer can be so compacted. And if dogs are urinating on it or anything like that, you can get a biofilm that's hydrophobic. And it's basically a desert. The tree is in a desert if you don't go in and actually cultivate that out. Okay. Sometimes in Florida, we also get this as well, a shallow water, high water table. So you dig down and there's water there. If you dig down for a planting location and it's full of water, and your plant isn't designed for a swamp, you probably don't want to plant it there. I mean, if your tree is designed for a swamp, let's say it's a bald cypress, it's going to get knees. Do you have room for those knees if it's sitting in water? Right? So, other problems that we can get in urban settings are things like drainage issues. So, we can have poor drainage. We can also have high clay content. When we're doing construction, a lot of times the soil table gets flipped around and we end up with the clay on top, which doesn't drain as well. And the clay tends to be a bit more alkaline. So, alkaline soils, so having a pH that is a bit too high inhibits growth. I like to tell people with pH, if the pH isn't right for the plant, it's the same as if we were trying to go to Publix on a holiday. So if you're trying to go to Publix on Thanksgiving, Christmas, or Easter, you know the food's behind that door, but you can't get it. So the incorrect pH is like that locked door at Publix. The plants can't get to that food. Okay. And then we have little to no organic matter. Now, our natural soils in Florida are relatively low in organic matter, and our native plants are adapted for that. But if we're bringing in specialty plants, it becomes a bigger problem. And if it's just builder sand, not even our natural soil, that is a problem even for our native plants. So, how much soil volume is required for a tree really depends on a lot of things. So, it depends on the species, right? Depends on the size. Generally, our depth that we need, because roots are within about the top 3 feet, you need to have at least 3 feet of soil for those roots to get down into. And they are working on different research projects to look and see if we can figure out exactly how much soil volume every tree needs. The general rule is the more the better. Okay. The larger the tree bed, the more successful that planting is going to be in the long run. So we can look at this tree bed right now. This is what we and where I was always working, we would call this a lawn strip, and it's really nice and big. We can see, this sidewalk is more than 5 feet wide. It's nice and big. We can see 2 adults walking side by side with room to spare over here. And this is at least as wide. So these trees, this was, again, I mentioned I had just come back from Denver. This was in Denver, just outside of Denver. And these were American elms, and they had plenty of space to grow, which was really nice to see. As opposed to this picture, where we can see there's significantly less soil volume. And based on the fact that these blocks look like newer concrete, it's entirely possible there was already a root issue here and those roots could have been cut. And we'll talk about that problem later. But here we can see compaction. We can see this is less than a 5x5 tree bed. We can see the root flare, but we can't see those supporting roots. So this tree is definitely looking like it's stressed, but not as stressed as this one. Okay. This one, we can see that it had a tree guard of some kind around it. And so this would have been soil at some point, but somebody has put concrete over the entire thing. This tree's, I'm sure, dead by now based on when I took this photo. But yeah, you're covering it up. There's no way for that plant to get anything that it needs. This one is mildly better because we can actually see some of the soil, and they've put these angles in. So when the tree inevitably grows, it's going to break. But a couple of other issues I see here is there is no root flare. This doesn't look like they have anything underneath to make up for the lack of soil availability at the surface. So this is, again, not much different than this pole over here. And remember, I mentioned earlier the pole. So we have this stick, this little block at the bottom. You can kind of consider that the equivalent of the pole's root flare. And when we have not enough space, not enough soil volume, you could end up having trees kind of fall over like this, where there's just not enough volume to hold onto the tree, which we don't want. We don't want trees to fall on anybody of any size, but the larger the tree, the more damage it's going to cause. So here again, another picture of a nice large tree bed with plenty of space. These trees are even offset to give it a little bit of interest. And the sidewalk's curved, which can kind of, make things feel a little bit more meandery when you're walking around the city, a little less just straight up grid. And I added this photo in again because I forgot that I was going to talk about it first, but I really like this tree bed. I think it's really well done, and it's going to look like its own little mini forest once it's mature. Now, here's another thing that can happen is where you don't always have room for a bed maybe like this, where we have this nice long strip, multiple trees, lots of soil volume, you might not have room for keeping all of this open for, pedestrian reasons. So you can go back and do something like this, where this entire area was actually cut out and soil volume was added. But then after the trees were put in, the soil in the middle was covered. It wasn't compacted to the same level as the sidewalk. So these roots are able to go between these two beds, which helps increase survivability. And this one, obviously, we just don't have the concrete, so it's going to get a little bit more water than the other one would. And we were able to put an extra tree in here as well. And both of those pictures I took when I worked in New York City. So those are from New York City street trees. So something else you can do if something like those tree beds I've shown you doesn't work, because there's just too much traffic, people are going to walk all over, there's going to be a lot of compaction, you could do suspended sidewalks. So that's an engineering marvel where you basically lift the sidewalk and the trees appear to be sunken in, and there's different levels of this. So this is a little bit like what a suspended sidewalk can look like. In this case, they didn't do concrete everywhere and they left it open here. So they have these grates to help make it where people can still walk. Tree in the middle. The nice thing about this is that you can get to where that tree root flare is. You can cultivate it if you need to reduce compaction. You can irrigate, you can weed, you can remove trash. Right? Now, when you get into something a bit more kind of standard for a suspended sidewalk, it's very deep. You can get accumulation of leaf litter and things around the trunk and the root flare that you don't want, that you want to be able to pull away. You do have to remove the grate at the top. We can see they have been removing this as this particular tree grows, because you don't want it to grow into it. But these can also turn into trash cans. So they can be good for the tree in a way, but if you make it to where you can't remove something around the tree to get in there and do maintenance, it ultimately could be detrimental as well. So you want to make sure you're paying attention. Now, within suspended sidewalks or standard sidewalks, you can also do structural soil cells, where you have pavement, you have some sort of structure. It can be beams, it can be blocks. There's a lot of different products out there. And then you have soil underneath. And the beams, or a cube structure like silva cells, they prevent compaction of the soil underneath. So you can have this nice, loose, kind of fluffy soil next to a street tree bed, where then the roots are able to get in, and they're not going to be going between the pavement right here. They're not going to go between the pavement and the soil that's too compacted, because they're able to get down there. And that's a lot easier for the plant, and you're going to get less infrastructure damage. So this is just showing you structural soil. This is the graphic made of it, and then this is what it looks like. I did, if you've never felt it, it's kind of an odd feeling for some reason. It sort of feels like chunky peanut butter a little bit when you're kind of playing with it. But it's got these larger rocks in it and then smaller particles, so that you can still get the support you need for the concrete on top, but then you still have all of this space that roots can get into, again, to not compete with the concrete. Now, you also want to think about drainage and irrigation. So one of the many things that trees do for us in urban settings is they help to collect the rainwater, so that we have less water going into the sewer system or running directly into our waterways. Now, generally, having a curb like this is something that isn't great, because it prevents that. But sometimes you can do something like this with curb cuts. This was something I saw in Denver, which was a good attempt, but the problem is these holes are not angled. They're straight. So if rainwater comes rushing down here, it's not necessarily going to go in. You generally want them slanted, so that when the water hits, it's deflected into these beds. And you would also have something like down here. If this is going downhill, I would also expect to see some on this end to collect. Now, I can't fault Denver specifically. They get about 12 inches of rain a year, so I don't think they're having a huge amount of water falling at any point in time, but they could do this better. So in Florida, if we're doing this, we definitely want to make sure we have different cuts to get the water into the tree beds, so that we are collecting that rainwater so it's not taking pollution directly into our waterways. So here's an example again where that rain would be able to fall directly into it. This is a great to help reduce compaction. These are fine. We just have to make sure that we are cutting them away as the tree grows so they don't grow into it. I've seen these. This is actually up in Gainesville. This is a type of porous rubber covering where it actually absorbs quite quickly for the water, but it helps to keep, it's really preventing tripping hazards. This isn't specifically beneficial to the tree as far as reducing compaction because people are walking on it. But if you have areas where that's inevitable and you know that you're not going to be able to get out there to deal with grates all the time, this is an option that a lot of locations do use. And you can lift it up, cultivate underneath, and do corrections as it goes. But the nice thing about them is that it does drain through. And I know that's for this, when people are new to it, that's kind of their first concern is why did we just put plastic on this? Water can't get through it. And this product, the water can get through. And again, there's certain locations where, you know, we're dealing with humans and plants in the same setting. So sometimes we have to compromise to make sure that the humans are safe and not tripping over everything. Now for drainage, this was a cool thing that is up in Gainesville on campus. So this is several different beds that are designed to collect a lot of rainwater, and those are bald cypress, so they can collect a large amount of rainwater, deflect it into here. The rainwater sits in and then drains down into water bodies after it's kind of been a little filtered through these street tree basins, which is really cool. And that's just a reminder too about root and crown structure. So again, I've already mentioned enough room for the crown, but we have to think about how big that root flare gets as well, because this is the lifting. And then again, if we're right next to a building, that this is never going to end well. This tree, honestly, I don't love taking trees out unless they need to, but this tree would need removed. This is not a place, an appropriate location for an urban tree to be. Now, there's been some research about distance from hardscapes. This was a research project done by a number of different individuals at UF, led by Dr. Hilbert and Kozer. And what they did was they looked at how close, like how much space plants need from infrastructure to avoid issues. Now, if we look up here, we can see the maximum genetic potential. So that was based on the maximum diameter at breast height found in Florida's big tree register. So like our biggest of biggest trees. Then they looked at what would the size of a planting space need to be for 75% maximum potential, 50 and 25%. Because as I said earlier, these trees are not going to get to be their maximum size in urban spaces. So you need to figure out how big you're expecting them to get and do management based on that. So planting distance tells you how far the tree should be from a single road, driveway, sidewalk, or other ground level infrastructure. Okay, so from center, how far that needs to be. And then planting width gives a necessary width of the planting strip for space between the road and sidewalk or median. Okay, so if we look at this, so if we have red maple, if we want it to get 100% of its maximum size, it needs to be, that tree trunk has to be at least 8 feet from infrastructure on the ground, and the planting width should be double that at that 16 feet. If you guys are interested, this document isn't available online anymore at the moment because it's under edits, but if you would like to see the document that was available before, I can send that to the Florida Friendly team to email out. I have it on my computer because it is valuable. There's just some things I wanted to go through and make changes for, because one thing we want to make sure we're clear on with this document, it is not saying that if your trees that are planted now do not follow this, that you should remove them. This is saying for new plantings what you should do. And then if you're trying to do corrections, this is a guideline you could try to work towards. But if you can't make it to these numbers, don't just take the trees out. Like there are other things that we're going to talk about that you can do to fix it for existing trees. Okay. So this is just showing that deflection, right? This is a curb here. This tree is falling over. The roots were not able to get through here. So this would have been, I mean, this planting bed's only like a foot and a half wide. This is not a location for trees at all. Um, Maybe some large tree or large shrubs, small trees could potentially fit, but this is a place, wildflowers, turf, something different. Trees would be better offset. And then over here we have this tree that's starting to eat the curb. It's got a relatively large tree bed, but it was just planted too close to the street. If this would have been planted maybe, say, back here a little bit, you could have been okay for a while. But this tree is going to just keep kind of causing these issues. So getting with that deflection, again, I was at a site visit recently and I saw this. It's really just a shrub, but it still has the root that's going directly towards the house. But then when we go in a little bit closer, we can see that it never hits anything. It just goes down here and it's going to stay away from that concrete. So again, with preventative, planting correctly is important. So if you're in the industry, generally on your plans, you should have a planting standard and you should be following that standard at planting as well. So within that standard, it's where your hole 2 to 3 times the size of whatever the root ball is that you have coming in. Root flare should be above a few inches above grade because it's going to settle. So you want it to settle at grade. So you have to find that root flare, right? Sometimes you have to dig down a little bit in a ball and burlap plant or even a container plant. For a containerized plant, you do want to check for girdling roots because you want to remove those circling roots as well, because once wood starts circling, it doesn't straighten out. So you might need to cut on a containerized plant. Generally, you don't on ball and burlap because they're generally field grown and they're cut. So the roots are cut, so you don't have to worry about circling roots. So you put 2 to 3 inches of mulch. Now, if you notice in this picture, right, that mulch goes up to where that root ball is, and then it stops. And the reason for that is when you have a newly planted tree, that is where you water. And if you're putting some kind of product there to water, you want to make sure that it's clear, but also you want to make sure it's clear so that the water can get in. You can have nice deep watering sessions so those roots go where they need to go rather than staying too close to the surface. So what we don't want to see is a planting that looks like this, right? We've got that telephone pole thing going again. Can't see the root flare. These trees are stressed. And these are also in Gainesville, not too far from the amazing structure I showed you with the cypress in them. So not everybody is working on the same projects, but if we really want to make sure we're all planting well so that these trees have the best hope. So for remediation, we really want to create a system that's going to accommodate the roots while minimizing damages to any walkways or other infrastructure. So a lot of times when there's some sort of conflict between tree roots and infrastructure, let's say a sidewalk, the go-to is to cut roots. That should be the last option, okay? Because if we start cutting roots, we're starting to reduce the structural integrity of that very large plant, right? We're going to pretend that says large, so I'm going to leave that there and just caught a typo over there. So large cuts through structural roots cause significant problems. So over here with those blue arrows, we can see where somebody's gone through with a chainsaw and cut some of those major structural lateral roots on one side. So there are now no structural roots on the roadside of this plant. So what's going to happen when a windstorm comes through? There's no support on one side. So if the wind's the right direction, that tree's falling on the house behind it. And whenever you're dealing with roots and dealing with trees, you have to think about what are the consequences of what I'm doing right now? Because in some cases, your company, your city could be legally liable for the damages because you reduce the structural integrity of that plant. So you want to think about, if I do this, what is the cause? Okay, so this is going to have massive decay, completely eliminate stability on one side, and this tree is going to be significantly unstable. Okay, so again, a lot of times they're going to cut. So we see a little bit of sidewalk issues here. Trees are marked. Easiest thing to do, right? Just have a sidewalk crew come out. They know nothing about trees. They're going to cut the roots and they're going to put a new sidewalk in. Well, if all these tree roots are cut on this side and we can see, right, planting strips that are too small, yards that are great on this side. So most of the roots are trying to get over here. There's a road on this side. You take the roots off on this side, you don't know which direction these are going to go, whatever way the wind blows, basically. And this is what that kind of looks like. We can see we didn't get a root plate come up because all the roots had been cut. So we have a road over here. The roots couldn't grow there. And then I can see new sidewalk, new sidewalk, new sidewalk. So the roots were cut all the way around. So it's almost like somebody sneezes and the tree's going to fall over, right? It's not going to take a large amount of wind for something like this to happen. And if you have a bigger storm come through, it's even more likely to happen because there's just no stability there. Now, there are different things you can do as far as root barriers go, but the effectiveness of them varies. So if you have heavily compacted, poorly drained soils and you put a root barrier in to say this is a sidewalk and you're trying to get the roots to go to the yard, if it's highly compacted, yeah, the roots are going to go down the barrier, but they're going to come up almost immediately. And then they're going to lift the sidewalk more in the middle than at the edge. Whereas if you have well-drained soil, you put the root barrier in, the roots go down. The roots are still going to be working to come up because they want to get to the surface for water and oxygen, but it's going to take them a little longer and they can go all the way under the sidewalk over to the actual lawn where they can get everything that they need. There's research too on exactly what angle that needs to be. So you want to look at your particular species and what's going to work for the roots that you're working with. But root barriers, they only go down so far and they're designed to deflect the roots. But again, the roots will come up again at an angle depending on how compact that soil is. So if you have tree, root, and sidewalk issues, you can also just do workarounds. So you can go around the roots instead of going over them or through them. You can also do some sort of alternative base reinforcement again. So we can have a sidewalk, we can do some sort of gravel. And then that's sort of, it's not exactly structural soil, but having gravel on top when you're compacting, you can get the rate of compaction you need, but the soil underneath isn't going to get as compacted because the gravel is kind of protecting it. And that's going to let the roots actually go across. As opposed to, again, this is that traditional base layer where the roots are going straight through here to get to the other side, and that's going to cause lifting. There's lots of alternative materials that you can use as well. So you can use crushed granite, gravel, wood decking, bricks, porous pavers, porous asphalt. If you've never looked up the real porous asphalt to watch the videos, the amount of water they can dump on that is absolutely amazing. I know cost was a limiting factor for using that. But Florida, because we don't get the freezes that they do up north, a product like that could be really great for helping with, keeping our hydrologic cycle consistent, even with development, because you can have the water still go down under the surface, which would be, I think it's cool. You should look into it. And all of these materials are going to allow more oxygen to get in for those roots as well. You can remove the asphalt or the concrete, add additional soil, and then pour over it again. Sometimes when you do that you can have like a larger bridge. You can also bridge over with something a little bit more like this. There's a lot of different ways to bridge over roots. So the next several slides, I know I heard that you guys turned off the chat feature. But since it's off, if it's off, then you can just write it in the questions if you want, or just think about it. So the next
turn
several,
it back on, Jamie.
Oh,
I
perfect.
can turn it back on.
Thank you. So the next several ones, I'm going to show you pictures and I want you to type in the chat what you see as issues as we go through. Okay. So first question is, are you ready? So just type yes, so I know at least one person's ready to participate with me. Yay. Okay. All right. Here we go. Tell me all the problems you see. Or if you don't see any, that's okay too, because not all of these have terrible problems. Okay, we got compaction. What else? Too narrow. Poor soil. Yes. Distance to the curb. Cut root flare. Small roots. I don't even see any structural roots in this planting bed. And conveniently, this was located outside. I got a lot of really great pictures in Denver last week. Yep. Compaction. Utility. Thank you. We should not be planting trees where utilities are going to be in the bed. And ideally, we shouldn't be adding utilities to the tree beds either. So I've seen different ones where they have plugs for Christmas lights and things like that. Yeah, that can look pretty, but your tree is going to eat that utility at some point as it grows, and that's going to be a problem, right? So great job, everybody. Ready for the next? Yeah, the walkway's kind of tight, but I mean, the benefit, there is one good thing here. They did put tree protection around it, which was really protection to keep pedestrians from falling in. But hey, they have done that. And I don't know what they're working on here. I don't know if they're doing something with utilities or if they're trying to do something to benefit this tree. I don't know, but it was fascinating to get to see. All right, next up, what's wrong here? Or what's right here? What are we looking at? It's not centered. Trunk is too close to grate. Yep, we need to be taking part of that grate out. Yep, failed to enlarge. And the ironic thing is they failed to enlarge the grate. It's ironic that it needs to be enlarged because this is a very small tree still. But because it wasn't centered, it maybe needed a stake at some point. Now we do need somebody to go out and actually make this cut. It is definitely leaning. Actually, somebody mentioned there's trash. There was a raccoon under here before I took the picture. It scared the absolute bejesus out of me when it came running out. I'm just happy I stuck around long enough to take the picture because that was something you did. Like wildlife can live under them too, and that can be a little bit terrifying. Yeah, it's not being monitored. And that's the biggest problem with these grates in urban settings is when you put them in, maybe there's that idea that, yes, we have somebody that will monitor them, but then they quit or they get fired for some reason. And then the next person, there's no documents of this needing to happen. Yeah, it is a nice big grate. If this tree was centered, it would be fine. And there were a lot of others. So these are crepe myrtles. And there were a lot of others that were fine. It was just this one that was a bit of a leaner. All right, next up, what do we see here? No flare. It's a little bit, there's a little flare down here, but it's not great. It's too narrow. If this helps, this is a live oak. It does look a bit more like a pole, right? There's no room, right? It's only got room on two directions to really grow any kind of roots. Now, if you go to this parking lot, which I cannot tell you where it is, you will find that there's actually root damage happening in the asphalt of the parking lot as well. But there's just not, yeah, the grass is also too close. We should not have grass going all the way up to the trees because that's just asking for damage. But this is just waiting for it to fall one way or another. So whenever I would be in this parking lot, in Florida, normally we try to park under trees, right? And if you're on this webinar, you probably do at least a level 1 inspection before you park to make sure a limb's not going to fall on you while you're, running into Publix. But I would not park under these because if a big storm came through, you don't know which direction they're falling. I mean, they're not going to eliminate the parking spot for the tree in this location, but there is ample places around the parking lot for a lot more trees to be planted to still get the benefit from it. All right, how about this one? I'll go ahead and tell you this is kind of this is a type of locust and it's not necessarily a highly valuable tree, but it already, yeah, you guys have it. It already failed once. And the sidewalk isn't just too close. They re-poured the sidewalk. Instead of taking the tree out, they've re-poured it to just continue to have the problem. I agree, Tina, with the LOL on this. And there's a little bit of room here if you wanted some kind of very small tree to large shrub, but this just isn't even a tree that's worth putting the effort into keeping and should really be taken out. Yeah. You think that's sad? Wait till we get to the next one. Here we go. Oh no. Yes. Oh no is right. So this is some sort of rental property here, and this is where they park. So to make more room for parking, they have paved up almost the entirety of this really quite large old tree. There is a growth, a burl happening right here, not really of a concern. And there is a lawn over here, but you can't see my shadows in the way, but there's damage from roots in the asphalt here, over here. It's just this. I believe this used to be a lawn, and then they decided because they were renting the house to make it somewhere that the renters could park. And that's what they did. I mean, I guess they at least kept the tree, and we'll see how long it stays there. Yeah, we see this far too often. Yep, trip hazard, lots of targets, yeah, and if people are parking under it, there are even more targets. All right, next up, what do we see going on here? All of these need a track assessment done, Belinda. All of them would. We don't have enough of those happening. Could be girdling roots. We can't see them though, but we can think. All right. So what do we think about these planter beds? Okay. Potentially not enough volume. We don't know what's underneath, right? So we can't do too much. They're built onto the sidewalk, yes. Why is it raised? That was my question. Why is it raised? Okay. Could need mulch, but it's confined. We've got plants to compete. It's confined. It does, if this goes down 3 feet, the soil volume could be okay, but the first foot and a half, the roots can't go anywhere. They would just go down. So this is a case of I really wish I had x-ray vision so I could see what it looked like underground. This could potentially work if you have the right infrastructure underneath, but this is a case of you have to know that at a certain time you're taking these trees out and replacing them because they are not going to get to their full size. So it looks great on paper, but in practicality, it doesn't always work. So to me, this is an example of we as arborists need to help landscape designers a little bit more, right? All right, so we have another one coming up. We are almost done. So what do we think of this one? Ouch. I like the reactions. What is going on? That is a great question. So we have a tree cage. So we call this a cage because inevitably the tree is going to grow into this. Most likely they're going to forget about it. The tree is going to grow around it, die, and then some poor arborist is going to come with a chainsaw and hopefully get to go home to his or her family at the end of the day, because you can't see. So if you're working in the city and you have really old trees that kind of look a little bit wonky, let metal detect them. Like it could save your life. So what we have going on here, I'm not even sure. I took the picture because I thought the same thing most of you thought. But there's like the smallest little 12 by 12 inch planting space, metal grates all around, some sort of utility here. I would not, there's no, yeah, there are some suckers right there. It's in the shade. Yes, it's throwing up suckers. I would say this isn't a planting location. So a lot of times when we're trying to increase canopy, it's a push to put as many trees in as possible, which is fine. But you need to understand, right, that certain locations are not appropriate, and it's okay. It's okay to not to have empty spaces because a tree won't fit there. And if you really want greenery, that's where like a large pot with other plants in it can work to add the greenery if that's what you're looking for. Trees are not always the answer, right? Oh, that's sad, Jennifer. It's crying. Yes, it is crying for help. All right, this is the last one. What do we think? Compacted, poor soil quality, poor drainage. This is going to be one that would have had the compaction and that biological layer that I just went blank on what it's called. that prevents the water from getting through. Ooh, there's a long one here. John, hi, John. Welcome. Yeah, everybody should read John's comment. It's nice and long, stronger codes. Yeah. All right, let's see if anybody else had anything to say. People walk all over it. That is very true, Darlene. Okay, so now that we're sufficiently depressed, do you guys have any questions?
Hey Jamie, that was fantastic. You covered a lot of material in the last hour, and yes, there are a lot of questions. So we'll kind of start from the beginning. That 30, 20, 10 rule for tree diversity.
Mhm.
Can you cover that again? What those various categories were?
Yes, so it's 10% from one plant genus. So an example of that would be like Quercus virginiana, right? And then 20% from, species. 10% from one plant species, the Quercus virginiana. 20% from one plant family. So in that case, that would be Quercus, right? And then 30% from one plant family, which would be Fagaceae if we're using live oak as an example.
Fantastic. Another person talking about how they often see trees being planted too close together. What what can people do
That
to?
depends. I would have to know a little bit more of the context on what too close together is, because there is something to be said for grouping trees for certain things. It doesn't always work in urban settings, especially if it's not in a large enough bed. Um, so I would want to see some pictures before I could comment specifically on that, because it may be bad, it may be fine.
Okay. I know how you discussed early on in your talk how sometimes those groupings are really beneficial, for wind events and things. So,
They can be, but then you have to still space them an appropriate distance apart. That's why it depends. But when you think too about the woods, obviously the trees aren't planted a specific distance apart. They're planted how it works in the woods. And some plantings are trying to mimic that. So again, I love to, if you have pictures, you can send me pictures of them and I will give you my opinion.
fantastic. And just to remind everybody, her email is there in the bottom right-hand corner. So if you do have questions that she can follow up on. Some areas of Florida don't have 3 feet of soil. You talked about, most tree roots being in that 3 foot. If you have less soil depth, do you need to make sure you have a wider planting space than would normally be recommended?
So you would want something a bit wider. If you don't quite have 3 feet of soil, first I want to know what you're hitting, because I know in Florida there's a lot of different things. It could be the hard pan, it could be a water table. And you just have to kind of adapt based on your location on what tree works best there. So on average, you want 3 feet, but that's an average, right? Sometimes you want more, sometimes less will work, depending on what you're planting. Also, I said specifically today, I was only talking about trees. There are places where a tree won't work, but a palm will work. And a palm is still better than no plant whatsoever, right? Palms have a lot of value. Dr. McMillan, who's coming next month, and I talk a lot about the fact that, sometimes palms are the best option. And that's great. Palms are still wonderful. They have different benefits. Some of the same ones, but it's a little bit different, but they're still valuable in our urban spaces.
Fantastic. Do you ever see any erosion issues underneath suspended sidewalks?
I've never gotten the pleasure of looking underneath suspended sidewalks after they've been constructed, so I'm not entirely sure. I wouldn't expect a lot of it though, because it's an enclosed system.
Yeah,
So if
usually
you
it's in
have
a
some,
well. Yeah.
yeah, it's all kind of built in so it can't move too far in any one direction.
All right. You had mentioned that you could potentially provide a link to the document with the recommended planting spaces. Is that something
Yes,
that you could send to me and I can send
yes,
out to
I
the
will
group?
send you. It'll be an attachment because it's not available online right now because they're in the middle of updating some things. And part of the reason for the update, as I mentioned, people were using the document to say, oh, our trees don't meet this, so we should remove them. And that is not what the document's for. It's really for how do we do better with new plantings. So as long as you all understand that, happy to share so you can look at it. But yeah, please don't use it to justify removals because it's not what it's for.
Terrific. Let's see. What is the efficacy of root deflectors placed against sidewalks and roads?
So it depends on the compaction of the soil. If it's really nicely loose soil, not heavily compacted, they work really well for getting tree roots from a tree planting strip into a yard. It's less efficacious when you're dealing with the road because the road's so much bigger, and eventually those roots are coming up because the root barriers only go down so far, and then the roots are going to come back up. And again, as if it's seriously compacted, those roots come up at a steeper angle. So instead of having the roots maybe lifting from the edge of the sidewalk and going over, they might just come straight up the middle and lift it through the middle. So it really has to do with what's underneath the sidewalk. So if we pay more attention to what's under the sidewalk, we can reduce the conflicts between the trees and the sidewalks.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's really important information. Um, if you have to cut a superficial lateral root because it's lifting a concrete slab, what can you put on the cut to protect the root and tree from having decay issue?
Nothing really. Ideally, whenever you do a cut, you if it's small enough, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. Trees do have that amazing ability to compartmentalize decay when you're cutting things correctly, but also when you cut a plant, right? They start oozing, kind of like the equivalent of us bleeding, and that helps to push out like bacteria and fungus. Whereas if you put something on top of that, you're now trapping the bacteria and fungus in a nice, dark, wet place. Even if it's something that's supposed to be antifungal or antibacterial, it still ends up causing problems at the end. So it's better to just like let it air out, let it dry, cover it up again.
Great. How do designers plant for overhead utilities, which often get moved into trees as roads become widened? Um, that's really a difficult situation when, with changing infrastructures.
Yeah, so I actually have I'm going to be teaching some afternoon arborist sessions this fall, and one of mine is about trees and utility lines, especially the overhead ones. Um, how designers deal with them, it depends. My experience is designers don't talk to utilities enough. I talk to utilities. I used to work in utility arboriculture. Generally speaking, they've told me over and over again it would be ideal for this a tree to be at least 20 feet away from above ground power lines because that means they're not going to have to do major pruning. It's just going to be on the tips. The structure of the tree is going to stay for the most part intact. There are cases where new lines come in, but it's really complicated. It depends on how high the line is, what the voltage of the line is, how far away things need to be. Um, but generally speaking, avoid trees that are going to grow into the line when possible because that just saves everybody problems. Because the utility company's number one goal is keeping the power on, right?
Very good.
Come to my next presentation about trees and utilities. Email me. I'll add you to my email list.
Um, Most of the examples that you showed didn't seem to have any visible irrigation systems. Are you finding irrigation being worked into designs and plans?
Sometimes I see irrigation getting worked in, but not always. And again, the problem with putting any utility, including irrigation, in like a street tree bed is it's going to kind of get eaten up as that tree grows. So it's going to cause problems later on. So it's not always the best. Hand watering oftentimes is the best way to get all the water that you need because those little bubblers, drip irrigation, anything like that is not giving the amount of water that plant needs to establish. Trees need like 20 gallons or more every week in large sections at a time, not just little dribbly little bits of water. You need to be putting 10, 20 gallons on at a time to make sure that tree establishes. And thank you, Rebecca, reminded me to mention that I do have an in-person class next week called Connecting Florida Friendly Landscape Principles to Urban Forestry. It's a live class. It's in person at our Sumter County Extension office. Registration's still open. All day includes lunch, and we will look at each Florida-friendly landscape principle in depth with how it impacts urban forestry and how everything's connected.
Fantastic. Jamie, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I love all the recent images, so we got to see some new things from your travels and from your past careers. It's just your experiences are vast, and we really appreciate you sharing that. I do want to remind everybody that we do have our next month's webinar. You heard Dr. Daugherty talk about it numerous times with Dr. Micah McMillan. That's Wednesday, August 11th at 10 a.m. And that's going to be on palm tree management. Please make sure you fill out the survey that pops up. Jamie, thank you so much. And I hope everybody joins us next month and has a great week.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.